Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about research. So, last time we talked a lot about what sort of subfields or topics in chemistry you might be interested. However, to really kind of get an idea of what you're doing, a good place to start is going to be research. Now, it turns out there's going to be a lot of different reasons to do research. And depending on where you're at, different ones might tend to dominate. So, one of the classic answers of why to do research is it turns out you can often make a bit of money by working in a research lab, either here or at Truman or externally. Alternatively, a lot of Truman professors are willing to award you some sort of college credit, which can be a good way to pad your schedule. But probably one of the biggest ones is it's also just a really good way to build up skills or experiences. So if there is a new set of skills that you want to kind of develop, you want some experience, say, working with theoretical chemistry. You may want to make sure that you know how to use, may want to know how to use the NMR. A lot of a lot of jobs as you go forward into grad school, industry, or professional school likes to see a good padded resume. And it turns out one of the big things they often look for is going to be the skills that you only really build up in research. So this is a really important idea. If you want to go ahead and be successful after college, you usually are going to want to do at least a little bit of research while you're here. And similarly, it's also just a good general way to gain knowledge. If you want to go ahead and figure out whether you like physical chemistry, go work in a physical chemistry lab. If you think you might be interested in doing organic chemistry, go ahead and learn a little bit of organic chemistry. You're going to end up learning a lot of things that you'd expect and a lot of things that you wouldn't. So again, when trying to figure out what you want to do, doing a little bit of research and getting your feet wet is a perfect thing to do. And undergraduate is the perfect time to do it before you get too invested in a given topic in grad school or in a job. Also, similarly, research is a good way to actually start making a bigger difference. Try and finding it can be often useful if you have a topic you care about, like Alzheimer's. You might want to go ahead and try and find a lab that's working on that issue. And it can really be a good way to make you feel better. And again, nothing nothing gives you good exposure to a new field of science and figuring out what you like rather than research. It's getting your feet wet and getting deep in to what it really would be like going to grad school or working in industry, depending on what kind of research you're doing. But honestly, one of the most important ones is it's a really good way to build new connections. If you want to go on into grad school, you're going to want to maybe do some research outside of Truman, as well as some research with professors here, because that's how you get good resume letters. That's how you can start mining your professors' connections. And this is how you can really start moving forward, because it's not always just what you know, it's again often who you know. So hopefully I've persuaded you that no matter what you want to do, research is a good place to start. But the first question you should try and ask yourself is, which area of chemistry do you care about the most? Do you want to go ahead and try and work in physical with me and Bill, or maybe organic or biochemistry, analytical or inorganic? Which type of topics and subdisciplines essentially may have the questions you care about, but also which one of these subdisciplines has the approach that most jives with how you like to look at the world. And if you really want to go out and do research as a career, you're going to find that you're going to have the longest career and be the happiest if you find whichever discipline works the best for you. And I try and encourage everybody to keep trying a different subdiscipline until you find your comfort zone and what makes you the happiest. For example, as an undergraduate, I was very happy that I spent some time doing organic research. and inorganic research and physical chemistry research. And I was definitely the most happy doing the time and asking the why questions that was just very physical chemistry. So, and just because you start doing research in organic chemistry doesn't mean that you can't move in between subdisciplines. And remember, what might make you happy at one point may end up shifting. So try and keep that in mind. So now we have an idea of what topics you can do research in. Let's talk a little bit more about where you can do research. So the classic institution that everyone talks about doing research in is the academic setting. So this is typically, you're going to go ahead and work for a university. You're going to try and find a department that fits your ideas. So this may be a chemistry department, it may be a biochemistry department, it may be a bio department, it may even be a chemical engineering or health science department, depending on what they're doing. Then typically the faculty are going to be the people in charge of setting up research projects and generating research questions. And this might be where you, if you like determining what you do, this might be where you want to end up eventually. But there's also people such as the professional support staff. This can go anywhere from people who are in charge of running the NMRs at a large university. It can be the people who are in charge of blowing glass for special glassware at a university level, or it may just be the person who is helping maintain cell cultures for an individual lab. And then the real workhorses of an academic department is going to be the graduate students. So the graduate students are the ones who are given projects often on a 4 or 5 year, as long as a 7-year basis. And each student will be given a project. They'll start by, at the low end, learning how the project works. And by the end, they're usually determining the direction and general and general format that a project takes. In the middle, you're also then going to find postdoctoral fellows. Sometimes the postdocs will be in charge of running projects. Alternatively, they'll come in and work with a grad student to get trained in. And by the end of their 2 to 3 year term, they may be in charge of starting up a new project or running a different one. But in between grad students and postdocs, these are the people who are fundamentally running the lab, whereas the faculty is generating the direction. And then because mundane everyday tasks are always needed, I give you the undergraduate student. This will often include starting at such tasks as dishwashing, but it's important that you get an exposure to the basic task before you can start seeing how projects as a whole come together. So if you start in a research project and you don't start as a researcher, that's okay. It's often important to learn the fundamental skills before you can work your way up. However, it is worth noting that there's often ways you can do research outside of the departmental structure at a university. And one of the big ones is there can be specialized research programs. And the structure of these programs can actually be quite varied. They may be quite small, and it will be run by a grad student or a postdoc, or it can be quite large, where it may have its own faculty structure. Similar to that is for large research projects that may span multiple departments, it's not uncommon for universities to generate special centers, such as a center of materials design. At which point, usually a faculty is generated as the head of the center, and they may have their own professional support staff that helps run the system. And then a collection of postdocs, grad students, and undergraduates who can help do the everyday work. Now, if you go ahead and want to try and do research in an academic setting, it's important to answer a couple of major questions. The first, of what type of research institutions are there? And this is typically divided into R1 and R2 colleges. So these tend to be colleges that have more than $5 million a year spent exclusively on research. R1 institutions are typically schools such as your Big Ten universities, which may spend multi-millions to low billions of dollars every year just to maintain a research setting. And so these are typically your PhD granting institutions, whereas R2 institutions may be master's granting institutions. So if you're at in academia, one of the things that really does define the academic setting is what kind of research questions are being asked. And one of the reasons that academic settings can be quite important is it turns out that these are one of the best settings to ask basic research questions. So less things of how do I use a piece of knowledge, but maybe more fundamental things of how can I develop a certain class of interactions? Or maybe in a bio setting, what is this enzymatic pathway and how does it work and what does it do? So next up is what is the work environment like? And this can actually differ greatly from university to university and even from lab to lab. But one of the things you should typically expect in an academic institution is some sort of extended work hours. So 40-hour work weeks are usually a little bit of a dream in academia. And it's not uncommon for students to work 12 to 14-hour days or 6 to 7 days a week. And this can extend anywhere from the undergraduate level all the way up to the faculty themselves. So it is important to remember that if you're looking at an academic institution, you're often looking at long extended hours, but you get to ask primary research questions. Now, how are you measured to be successful if you're working in academia? This is typically all about papers and presentations. And so if you want to succeed, you're typically going to need to try and conduct as much new research as possible to generate these papers and presentations. And you're going to need, especially once you get to the postdoc or grad or faculty level, you're often going to need to spend a lot of time writing grants and papers to show that you've made progress in your area of research. And once you succeed, the other major metrics of success is going to be things such as promotion into, say, a faculty position, graduations, and special recognitions. But it turns out not all research is done in academia. Another major area of research is going to be in industry. And so in the industrial setting, you often split up your science into several departments. The first major one that most of you will probably be interested in is the idea of a research department. So these are the people who are going to be primarily devoted to developing new products and techniques that the company can sell. And there's usually going to be a group leader, who's typically going to have a PhD. However, some companies do hire group leaders with a master's. Then your typical researcher will have either a master's or a PhD, though at this point, a senior researcher, a senior employee with a bachelor's is not unheard of. And then most of the good grunt work is done by technicians with either bachelor's or associate's degrees. And then, because everybody has to start somewhere, you can spend some of your time before you get your degree essentially as an intern. However, depending on what topic you're interested in, these internships are usually paid, but occasionally not. However, it turns out that if you want to go into industry, the research department isn't the only place you can go. Another popular choice is quality control, especially for those of you who are more analytically minded. So, again, a quality assurance and control department is often led by a group leader who generates the overall schedule and direction of the department, but is often filled up by staff scientists with masters or PhDs who help try and essentially guide their individual projects or assignments. And then most of the grunt work, again, done by technicians and interns. However, if you really don't want to do research or you're not interested in a whole bunch of analytical chemistry, it turns out there's always the sales department because there's always a need for people with a good scientific background who can help explain what a new chemical or piece of instrumentation does when they have to go out to universities and other companies to try and sell their product. Now, let's say you want to go ahead and specifically work in research at a industry setting. Well, what kind of jobs are there going to be? So these can be majorly divided into either product development, so trying to generate new products, but it's also important to remember that once a new product is generated, there often needs to be a whole set of safety analysis. So this is even before you get to quality assurance of you need to analyze the safety and environmental impacts of any new products being developed, and it eventually needs to get rolled out into production. So if you're more analytically minded, or occasionally biochemically minded, safety analysis can be a good place to start. And if you like a lot more of the ideas of chemical engineering, then implementation of production might also be the place for you. Now, let's say we're working more on this product development and safety analysis part. So what kind of research questions are you going to be typically answering? Well, these are going to almost entirely focus on direct application. So you aren't going to be trying to figure out how an enzymatic pathway works. You're usually going to go to some sort of literature source for that. And then you're going to try and figure out exactly what drugs you may be able to use to block it or increase its production. So we're going to be almost entirely focusing on product generation, so things that can be monetized. However, the work environment can often be a little bit different than in academia. So the two biggest differences is you tend to have a lot more 9-to-5 work, where you may have some after hours or outside of work requirements. Those tend to be much less than in academia. But it is also worth noting there tends to be a lot more results focused, a lot more of what have you done for me recently, and goal and target oriented, again, mostly coming from the upper management. Now, how are you considered successful if you're in industry? This is mostly going to be all about, have you generated any new patents? Is there any new successful products? How many products have you been able to run through safety analysis? How many new factories have you been able to set up? So it's almost always going to be about deliverables and monetization. So generally, how are you going to succeed? It's going to be trying to generate as many safe products that can generate as much revenue as fast as possible. And so again, when you're looking at what type of research institution you might want to work for, especially when going in between industry and academia, two of the biggest things I probably want to make sure that you're focused on is, do you like doing basic or direct or application-based research? And are you okay with a 9-to-5 or a more fluid work schedule? So these are things to consider as you're going forward. It's also worth noting that there are other sources of research out there, including some NGOs and also government agencies. However, their structure and requirements can tend to vary greatly from place to place. So this hopefully gives you an idea of the general structure of research opportunities out there and why you might want to conduct research. So next time, I'm going to try and give you a quick rundown of what research is available here at Truman, but also where you can go externally. Until then, take care.